This mistake was played in over 60 million chess games, making it the most common chess opening mistake of all. I'm Grandmaster Igor Smirnov, and let me show you what that is and how to take advantage of it. You can make use of this tactical pattern in different openings playing either white or black. For example, let's begin with this common move order. And how do you think, what is the most common move played by white here? It is the move bishop to c4, and strangely, it is wrong. After bishop to c4 allows black to execute this little but important tactical trick, knight takes e4, temporarily sacrificing the knight because on the next move we're going to get it back thanks to this double attack. And initially, it may not seem like such a big deal, after all, that's just an exchange. But the thing is, your opponents just keep going from bad to worse. They don't know how to deal with it. Bishop c4, the move they played previously, was already wrong. But in this position, the majority of your opponents will follow up with yet another mistake, bishop takes d5, and after that their position is already tough. Now, spoiler, the correct move and the only correct move by white here is bishop to d3, but only a minority, according to the database, 17% will play the right move, making that the majority, over 80% of players, will play one of the moves that basically lose the game quickly. For example, bishop takes d5 is the move your opponents will typically play, trying to get at least one pawn for their piece, but after queen takes d5, you get this position that is totally dominant for black. It may not look that way, however, you occupy the center, you attack their knight. If he tries to somehow solidify it, you can always kick it off by going f5, maybe even pawn to e4, chasing away the other knight. You've got two very powerful bishops controlling the entire board. This bishop without the counterpart is especially dangerous for white. You're going to bring it right here, pin the knight, and all in all, you've got a strong attack and white has nothing to oppose. For example, if they play knight to c3, which I think is the most played move here, trying to attack the queen, you can play queen to d6. And I like this move because it allows you, down the line, to make this queen lift to the king side, and we anticipate your opponent to castle there, making their life hard. For example, if they castle or play any other move, you play bishop to g4. And that move is simple, however, it's hard for white to deal with, because what can they do? You're pinning their knight, you're going at some point to play knight to d4 and reinforce the threat. If you can trade it off successfully and weaken their pawn structure like that, their king will be dead open and you're going to checkmate it soon. You can also easily castle queenside, play f5, and then either e4 or knight to d4, putting more and more pressure to this pinned knight. Your plan is very simple, but again, it's hard for white to do anything about that. By the way, if they play pawn to h3, trying to get rid of this pin. Now, definitely we're not going to trade off. We want to maintain the pin and take advantage of it. You could just drop the bishop back, and that would be a perfectly fine move to play. But you can also use that fish and pole trap, pawn to h5. You sacrifice the bishop, and again, not easy for white to deal with it at all, because if they don't take, you're going to continue with your usual plan. You're going to castle, play knight d4, and just develop your usual attack against this pinned knight. But if they ever take on g4, then the cure is worse than the disease, because now not only this knight is attacked, but also you open up the h-file for your rook. And now all you need to do after any move of white, basically, in most cases they're going to do something like knight to h2, you're going to slide with your queen to h6. Notice how useful it is that we can reposition our queen to the king side, and now thanks to this battery along the h-file, they're done. If the knight ever moves, you're going to play queen h1 mate. If they try to escape with this move pawn to f3, trying to provide this escape path for their king, you can shut it down by going g3, and then it's all the same stuff, queen takes h2 or queen h1 mate. What else can they do to defend their knight? By the way, I'm putting more attention to this position because that's what you're going to get most frequently. Now, they may also try to defend it by queen to e2. To this, we respond with the same pin to their knight, bishop g4. And as they try to get rid of this pin, now we have a pretty elegant way to make use of it straight away. We don't even need to move the bishop. We can counter-strike with knight to d4. And now we take advantage of this queen on e2. But besides that, we're also attacking pretty much everything. We're threatening this pawn on c2. From there, we're going to attack the king as well as the rook. And we add one more attack to this knight, which is still pinned. For that reason, they can't just take our knight. That would drop the queen. And after that, you'll also win the knight on e4 anyways. Therefore, they can't do that. But they have to somehow guard all these weaknesses. And if they play queen to d3, then you can trade on f3, checking their king. They have to recapture. Now you can trade queens. and at this point it becomes obvious that your opponent missed the class and pawn structures. It was not easy to get the worst pawn structure ever, and on top of that you can win this pawn, attack him, and you got a totally winning position. Again, you're going to castle queenside and pick up this pawn as well probably, so that should be easily winning for you. It doesn't matter if they guard their knight by the pawn, we're gonna still use the very same plan, bishop g4 pinning the knight, and if they ever try to really play h3 and after that g4, solving the problem and breaking the pin, like, yeah, there is no pin any longer. However, now their kingside is very much weakened, therefore they basically can never castle kingside. That would be very dangerous. Plus, you're now attacking this knight on e4 once again, and they still have to think and do something about that. And now h5 will always be a very unpleasant move for them to deal with, because after that, as you take, you open up your rook, and they're in trouble. If they try to play knight to c3, attacking your queen, in this case you don't even have to slide back to d6 as we did in the previous variation, because previously, if you remember, we tried to reserve the option for our queen to be transferred to the kingside, and now that's not really an option. But we can just play bishop b4 to not even waste time, because their kingside is so weakened that we really wish to just rush into the attack. Let's say if they play bishop d2, neutralizing the pin, we can trade the knight, again, so that we don't have to worry about the queen safety. Then we can castle, and on the next move, after anything that they do, you're going to break open the position and go for the deadly attack. Either pawn e4 or pawn h5. We're going to undermine their weaknesses, something like queen e2, let's say you go pawn e4, and now they're done. After this exchange, their king is centralized. This knight is still pinned. They somehow broke through this pin, but now they're also getting in trouble along this diagonal, and they're losing the game. Sometimes they go rook to d1 here. I think it's the most played move in the database, but that's yet another mistake. And I've told you that previously, that, you know, the problem with this whole tactics is not even the very starting position, because you could say that it is an inaccuracy and white can somehow defend after that. But realistically, they follow up with plenty of the other mistakes, and you just win games, such as here. Like, you can trade everything on d1, and then you play bishop takes f3 with this double attack, and you literally erased their entire army. There is only one way for white to get away after missing these tactics, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But before that, let me address another question you may have. Like, Igor, it's all good, but my opponents don't play knight to c3 here. In fact, you can get to these tactics through different move order, through different openings, really, and also for white just as well. For example, if they begin not with knight to c3 move, but with bishop c4, which is indeed a lot more common, after knight to f6 attacking this pawn, some of your opponents will indeed defend it by going knight to c3, and through the transposition we got to the same position, you can still pull off the same tactical idea. When you're playing white, you can play knight f3 attacking the pawn, and after this you can go knight to c3, waiting for them to bring their bishop out to c5, because that would set conditions for the same tactical operation. Knight takes e5 followed by d4, and black will experience all the same issues. Now you attack the knight, if it goes back you're going to grab the pawn on g7, plus f4 is coming. They're facing all the same issues. They may resist playing bishop c5. Let's say you go knight c3 and they don't play bishop c5 but go knight f6. What do you do then? Well, you can still play bishop b5. Notice we do not play this wrong move bishop c4 ourselves. We already know that it's wrong. And therefore we let our opponent play that mistake. If they go bishop c5 right here, that is still the same stuff. Now we included moves bishop b5 and knight f6, but that doesn't change the situation overall. You can still play knight takes c5 followed by d4, and it's all the same stuff after this trade. The knight is attacked. If it goes away, you can play e5 and kick this knight away, or go bishop g5, pin it, all the same attacking ideas, and you have great opportunities to crush your opponent quickly. Alright, now let's talk about the right defense from these tactics. After this trade on e4 and pawn to d5, we know that most players are going to capture on d5, getting into a very dangerous and disadvantageous position. The only correct move for white here is bishop to d3. White wants to save the bishop, not the knight, because bishop is indeed a little bit stronger than a knight. And now after this exchange on e4, the position is approximately balanced. You can play bishop d6, castle kingside, and maybe at some point pawn f5 or bishop g4. You still have some attacking ideas, but objectively speaking, the position is approximately equal. With that being said, there is still a way for you to spice it up if you wish to. If your opponent managed to find the correct move bishop to d3, he definitely expects you to capture the knight, and objectively speaking, it is the best move for black to play. However, you can play pawn f5 and confuse your opponent further. Now with this, you want to not only grab this knight, but from there, you're gonna still fork these two other minor pieces, therefore white needs to run away with his knight. Nice for you that the most played move by white here is another incorrect move, knight to g3, and we'll see why it is incorrect in a second. You then continue with pawn to e4. Therefore, you don't lose a piece, you're going to get it back thanks to this fork. Now, they can't take on e4, that would be ridiculous, because, I mean, they would lose a knight to no avail. They would still lose one more piece on the next turn. Therefore, they can't do that. They'll usually play bishop to e2, and now they still anticipate you to capture the knight, finally, and you still don't do that. Instead of capturing f3, a much stronger move is the move pawn to f4. And at this point, we can see why putting the knight on g3 was wrong for white. It was better for white to retreat the knight to c3, and then this opportunity would not exist, and black would have to just straight on f3, get in an approximately equal position. But now f4 still pressures whites further, getting into this ridiculous situation where both knights are attacked, and they can't be easily removed. They can't easily move forward, because, you know, this knight can't go here or here because of your knight. Your knight controls all the same squares. This knight from g3 also can't go to this square because of your bishop. They usually drop it back to f1, but now they obstruct movement. You can see that this king is really suffocated. After a trade on f3, not only you got your piece back, but now their situation is really clumsy. They can't move this knight away, they can't castle. You can just play bishop c5, castle, and attack him along the e-file. They mostly play pawn c3, trying to go d4, but that is not very helpful, because after a castle and pawn d4, they hope for your bishop to move, but it's stronger to play rook e8 check, and there is no convenient way for white to cover here. Your pawn on f4 does a great job controlling this square, therefore they have to drop this bishop back. But now you can keep attacking. You can go bishop g4, making use of this pin, and it's going to be a hard day for your opponent. If he tries to cover pawn f3, you continue with one more counter strike, queen to h4 check. If they cover, you take it. You still don't care about your bishop or this one because you have your own threats which are overpowering their like little attempts to cause you some discomfort. Now after pawn takes g3, there is this potential discovered attack, discovered check coming on the next move. They can't take it by the pawn because that would drop the rook, therefore they have to take it with a knight. But then you can make use of this pin once again by going bishop takes f3. The bishop is pinned down to the king, therefore it can't move, but you also hit this rook on h1. So they have to castle, trying to move their king and the rook away to safety, but you never let them break free. And here, I mean, of course your position is winning. You're already up a pawn and you're attacking, but the way to finish it off is knight takes d4. You want to also break open this diagonal for your bishop. And you indeed do that after the straight, check. The only way for them to cover is rook to f2. And again, you could probably win in multiple different ways. The most energetic and impressive way is to sack the rook right here on e2. I mean, honestly, that's not on a sacrifice, because now you attack this rook, but after knight takes, there is queen takes f2 checkmate. Now, this whole variation is fairly lengthy, but because it's a forcing line, you've got great chances to actually pull it off in your real games. Alright, now let me address one of the most common things that people write me about in comments, like, Igor, it's so cool, I'm very impressed, but I'm going to forget everything right after I stop watching the video. Now, let me tell you that I never encourage you to memorize variations. We're not robots, we're not supposed to do that. We need to understand the logic, and fundamentally chess is a positional game. If you understand positional chess well, all these moves, they only seem natural. Alright, let me flip the board, let me illustrate what I mean by that. Let's say you're facing this position as white, and you're seeing this position for the first time in your life. You know no theory. So how do you handle this situation? First off, if you've got a choice between dropping a knight or a bishop, you got to know that a bishop is stronger. Now, for beginners, they typically say that a bishop and a knight are, well, 3 pawns and they're about equal, but that is just a simplification to not overcomplicate matters for complete beginners. But generally speaking, bishop is a little bit stronger. It controls greater quantity of squares on the board. Therefore, if you've got a choice, you wish to save the bishop. And that is how you come to the conclusion that you should go bishop d3, not bishop takes d5, which would drop the bishop. You should instead drop the knight, but save the bishop. All right? Now, what if your opponent does not take here, but goes pawn f5? Now you need to move the knight somewhere. Again, let's say you don't know what to do. And you've got a choice basically between knight to g3 and knight to c3. How to pick the right move? Does it mean that you need to know a ton of theory? Does it mean that Fischer was right and it's all memorization and prearrangement? Like, not really. There is a general strategic rule that you need to move your pieces towards the center. And there is like the exact geographical center of the board, so to say. And there is a so-called advanced center, right? Extended center. All these squares, they're quite in the middle of the board, and it means that you should try to keep your pieces there. And that is why in most of the openings, minor pieces are developed to one of these squares, all right? Therefore, if you've got a chance to move the knight to this square, which is still within the extended center, or to move it outside of the center, you should choose a more central square, knight to c3. Now, as they go pawn to e4, and you've got a choice of where to move the bishop. Now, again, we already know that choosing between the knight and the bishop, we want to save the bishop, right? It's a stronger piece. Okay, now, where should the bishop go? And by the way, you know that it's not just about this particular position. It's about any chess game that you play, all right? The same logic will apply. Now, where should the bishop move? Okay, can't go here because it's taken away. I mean, certainly we can't go there, and certainly we don't want to go back to where we started. Therefore, we have a choice between bishop e2 or bishop b5. Now, which move should we choose? There is another general positional principle which says, I call it principle of maximum activity. You should move your pieces to most forward available squares. Very simple. When in chess, you want to seek activity. You want to make your pieces active. You want them to put pressure on your opponent. Therefore, choosing between two options, like all things equal, apart from that, we wish to play the most forward available move, bishop b5. And now after this trade at f3, white ends up with a good position. In fact, white is now pressing, and black needs to be careful to defend properly. So that's how you find proper moves, even if you have no idea about the theory, because chess is a strategic game. Now, positional chess is not a subject of today's video. That's why if you want to dive deeper into this, I've got another course called Level Up Your Chess, where I put together all these fundamental ideas that you need to know in order to bring your chess to the next level. If you're curious about that, you can click the link below the video in the description and check this out. Either way, let me know if you have any questions, and have a great rest of the day.